All right, if you are following on in our book, you will notice that the author spends basically two sections on the marks of church unity. But since we covered all of those marks over the last 2 weeks, we're going to go ahead and move ahead in our lesson to number 7. But before, I tell you what we're really and truly, we're not going ahead to 7. We're actually going to go a little bit of 6 and a little bit of 7. Okay? I'm sorry, but when I looked at it, I just felt like this was the right way to go, and you'll understand it once we get kind of down this path. I want everybody to take their Bible, Ephesians chapter 4, beginning in verse 25. And ending in verse 32. Do you see anything remotely similar to what we just got through kind of looking at this morning in our sermon time together? Anybody see anything similar?
Okay, it was what, Ephesians 5, what?
Ephesians 4, verse 25 through 32. So, Paul is going to give a list of behaviors that he tells the Ephesians that they should be practicing. But here's the thing on the surface. There's not anything particularly remarkable about the list. In fact, take a look at it again. Ephesians 4, 25 through 32. Like, for instance, verse 25. What does he say in verse 25? What should we do?
Stop telling lies.
Well, opposite of that would be to
Tell the truth.
tell the truth. There's not anything particularly remarkable about that, right? Verse 26, what does he basically tell us not to do? Don't lose our what? Don't lose our temper, right? Be angry and do not sin. 28, what does he say there? Basically, don't steal, get a job, right? Verse 32, what does he kind of say there? What? Be kind, right? Can I tell you something? Just about every religion in the world tells you those things. Just about every religion in the world tells you those things. So a lot of people will respond to that and they'll say, see, all religions are basically the same. The point of all religions, they say, is just to be good. Doesn't matter what brand name you use. Like if you go to Walmart, they have the Great Value brand. If you go to H-E-B, it's the Hill Country Fair. Is that right?
Well, or they even call it H-E-B.
Or even H-E-B brand, okay. But the idea of the world is it doesn't matter what brand you use, it's all the same product. Is that true? Is that what the world says?
Yeah, that's what it was.
And some of us have even thought, if the point of religion is to turn bad people into good people, well, Jonathan, I got a neighbor in my cul-de-sac, he's Hindu and he's a good person. Or there is a Muslim at my job that is a good person. So if the point of religion is to take bad people and turn them into good people, why should I introduce them to Jesus Christ? Because they're already good. If that's the point, then you're right. I mean, even an atheist. Can an atheist be a good person? Absolutely. I've known many. So a lot of times people look at this and they'll say, well, they're already good, so why share Jesus Christ with them? Mark?
So, if I have a friend who's, I believe is a really good person, like a really moral person, but he's, Hindu, right? Do you think he lives his life all the way like that? Maybe when he dies or at some point he'll get the chance to, meet Jesus, like the gospel story and everything, and like accept it and bow down, kind of like, once you think that everyone gets that opportunity at some point, even if it's like on the deathbed, like, or when they're close to death,
As long as they have a heartbeat,
they'll get it, right? At some point.
as long as they have a heartbeat and somebody shares the gospel with them or they studied for themselves, yes, they can come to know Jesus Christ.
But like, what if that never happens? Won't it still happen at some point?
Well, the Bible says at the day of judgment, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But at that point, it would be too late for them to make a change in their life because they were already, past that point. That's a great question. Not an easy one to answer, especially if your friend is Hindu. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that maybe you feel convicted to share with him. Like,
Yeah. Maybe that's good. Maybe you
maybe
feel,
it's your opportunity.
and that may be your opportunity.
Like, I grew up with a Muslim friend. It's like, I'm not going to be like, Jesus is the Son of God. Like, I can't do that. Like, maybe later on in life I'll have more courage to do that, but I just feel like that's kind of wrong.
I think the biggest thing in that case, if you're lacking courage, is to pray for courage, to pray for the Spirit to fill you with the courage that you need to do that. But also, I'll tell you this from my father. My father was unfaithful for most of my life. But my mother, she remained a steadfast, faithful example to him for all those years. And even if she couldn't, there were times where she would try to talk to him about his faith, but he would just shut down. But she continued to live that right Christian example in front of him for all those years. And before he died, he turned his life back to God. So it's possible. It's possible that the way you live in front of that person could have a positive Christian effect on them. Yeah, I agree. You don't want to ramrod somebody. You could turn them off that way. But there are gentle and loving ways to share Jesus Christ with someone who is of any faith. Anna?
If we share how we ourselves came to Christ.
That's right.
And God has a very simple plan of salvation. We hear the word, we believe what we hear, we confess that we're sinners. But there's another step that we did. We were baptized because then we were buried in Christ.
That's right.
And so that is all the process, very simple. And if we can share, if they say, well, why do you believe what you believe? Or what did you do? How did you come to be in this place? We can just say what we did. We heard the word, we read the word, we believed it. There's only one Savior, and there's one baptism, and there's one church.
Right.
There's nothing else. And if we just leave it simple, I think we will get it right, and people will get it right. Because when somebody asks us something and we lie to them and we're not saying what the word is saying, then we're not being honest.
Yeah, we're not representing him the way that we should. Kathy?
We went to a sunset supper a few years ago, and there was a man that had been converted from Islam to Christianity, and he wrote a book. And it might be if you can get it to your grandmother, and you can read it if you want to. But the thing in that is he realized, which we're going to do here, is there's one God. And when they say that, well, all these have the same God, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And that's what is good about that book.
So here's the question. Great question, by the way. Is there anything distinctively different about Christian moral teaching? Think about it. Or is it just all the same?
Jonathan, when you're mentioning, well, I'm just as good, Romans 6 says we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Even if you're a good person,
Nobody
you
is
still
good
sin and
enough
fall
to
short,
get
yes?
Yeah.
I want to try to show you something in the time that we have this morning. I want to try to show you that there is something distinctive, something fundamentally different, okay? But to do that, I've got to kind of approach this in a backwards format. I want to rewind all the way back to we're going to go back 8 verses, back to verse 17. So we were at 25 through 34. Let's go back through 32. Let's go back 8 verses to verse 17. Because what Paul's going to do here, he's going to give us an 8-verse theology lesson before he gives us a list of ways to behave. And I'm going to teach you, or try to anyway, that these moral commands grown out, that we see in 25:32 are of a different sort than what the other religious entities in our world teach. Verse 17. What does he say in verse 17? Somebody read that for us, please.
With the Lord's authority I say this, live no longer as Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused.
All right. Paul says, I say this, I testify before the Lord, that you must no longer walk as what people?
Gentiles.
As Gentiles do. Now, I want you to understand something here. It's kind of important. When Paul says Gentiles here in Ephesians chapter 4, he's not just referring to a certain group of people of a certain race, is he? No, he's talking about anyone who is not in a covenant relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, granted, there are Jews that weren't in covenant relationship with Jesus Christ under the new covenant, but at this point, he's talking about those that don't have the relationship. In the Old Testament, God revealed himself to the Jews. And anyone outside of that covenant, the Old Covenant, was referred to as what people? Gentiles. So by Gentiles here, Paul means, in this case, every person who's not in a relationship with Jesus Christ. He's about to give you a description, and I want to walk through it backwards, so let's start at the end of verse 19. Look at that. They have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. That, folks, is the language of craving. Greedy. I have to have these sensual pleasures. I'm hungry for them. I need them, so I've given myself entirely over to them. I talked about it in the sermon. These are people that feel enslaved to their desires. I had a girlfriend, not a girlfriend, but a girlfriend that I grew up with. And she was enslaved to this image of herself that she wanted to obtain. She wanted to have the perfect body, the perfect size, everything had to be perfect. And she became destructive to her own body because she became a slave to some of those desires. She wasn't eating healthy. She was overexerting herself. I mean, I remember watching her just kind of waste away. And I felt so bad because I think if you're honest, we've all had something in our life that was a craving or desire. And sometimes those can be unhealthy things. Like, for instance, we live in America. Main concept of America in the early days was all about achieving the what? The American dream. And you look at the frontier settlers, how many of them died trying to travel across this great country to find land and prosperity? Sometimes desires and urges and cravings can take us on a destructive path. Do you know that there are people today who are enslaved to pornography? It's not just lust. It's an escape. It's their way to find comfort, to relieve stress, to add excitement, to give them something to look forward to. Drugs and alcohol, same way. It's a refuge. It's more than just a bodily desire to drink alcohol. These people crave the feelings and the security and the safety, that control that some drugs or alcohol give to them. What about greedy lust? And other letters of the Apostle Paul, this really means the same thing. He says the heart of sin is the Greek word epithemia. And that word is often translated lust. Now, whenever I say the word lust, what is the one word everybody thinks about?
Sex.
Yeah. But epithemia is not just about sex. Epithemia means a soul that has a craving, a yearning, or a greedy desire. Something of which you say, I've got to have it. I'd rather be dead without it. Is it possible to have lust for bad things? Sure. Is it possible to have lust for good things? If anything, and this is the reason I'm telling you this, if there's anything in your life that you crave, that you think, my life cannot be good without that, then that's epithemia. If there's anything in your life other than Jesus Christ that you crave that deeply, then that's lust. That's epithemia. For some people, it's the security of money, right? The thought of financial stress. How many of you have ever lost sleep because of something financial going on in your life? For others, it's an insatiable desire to be successful. I got to be the very best at whatever I do. For others, man, I'm going to tell you this, because this is something a lot of people crave being in a relationship. You take a young lady that feels like her life is not complete as a young teenage girl unless she has a boyfriend. Or a boy that feels like he's not complete, he's not whole unless he has a girlfriend. Can that turn to a epithemia type situation? Yeah. I always tell my daughters, and this is important, I feel like anyway, that they do not need the attention and affirmation of a man for them to feel whole. If they ever want to feel they have some attention or positive affirmation, just come talk to me. I'll tell you how beautiful you are and how much I love you. It's hard when they start dating, though. I was lucky that my daughter didn't start dating until she was 18. She finds one guy, and now she ain't going to find nobody else, apparently. That's what it seems like to me. And that's fine. He's a good guy. Still worry about it. Still pray about it. Did you know that everybody's heart in this room is unique? Yep. But I guarantee you, even though all of our hearts are unique, every one of us still have a craving of some sort. Just ask yourself, what is the one thing that you feel like you've got to have in order for your life to be good? Some people say Netflix. Right? If you didn't have Netflix, your life wouldn't be good. If you didn't have your car, life wouldn't be. If you didn't have your house, if you didn't have the food if you could take away any number of things, and a person might say, if I don't have that, I don't feel like I'm living the good life.
Secure in the love of God.
Secure in the love of God. That's where it's really at. You know, I've known a lot of middle-aged mamas that their desire to always have their family around and for everybody to always get along goes beyond the normal desire and becomes an obsession? I've known dads that thought having control over their children, even after they left home, became so obsessed that it became a craving that ultimately caused problems in their relationships with their children. But ultimately, what the Apostle Paul is saying, this is the condition of people apart from God, those who have craving, greedy hearts. Now, where does he say these cravings come from? Look at verse 18. Where does the Apostle Paul say that these cravings come from? Ephesians 4. Look at it, verse 18.
Their heart.
He says, they are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardness of heart. The key phrase, they become this way because they are alienated from the life of God. In other words, these cravings come about because there's an absence of God in their lives. Do you realize that this morning, that God fills a void in your heart? This world tries to fill that void with so many things, does it not?
That's why we have to stay in the Word, because when we get out of it, right away,
Something else is going to start filling it.
something else will fill it quick.
Melvin?
Is this another way of saying that a person's conscience becomes severed? Isn't there a Bible verse that says that your conscience, you can sin so much
Your
that
conscience becomes dull.
severed or dull?
Dull,
Would be another
yeah.
way of saying it. After a person gets to that point, is there any chance of return?
Absolutely.
Like the young man over there was asking.
Absolutely, there is. You ever heard of St. Augustine? I was researching this week, and I don't know that much about St. Augustine, but according to the writings, he was a sex addict before he came to know Christ. And he wrote this word. He says, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. I don't know that much about him, but I thought that was interesting. Next question. Where does this alienation from God come from, and why do we stay that way? Go back to verse 18. It says, they are alienated from the life of God because of the what? The ignorance that is in them. So we stay alienated from God because we are ignorant of Him. We can't see His beauty. We don't sense His glory, His majesty, His loving kindness, or the fact that He can satisfy all of our needs. Do you realize there are people sitting in their homes this morning that have no idea what they were created for? You realize there are people that don't know today why God created them? They don't know their purpose. They don't know their identity. How many of you felt like I did in life when you started to realize that there was truly a purpose for your being here? How many of you ever felt that? I did. I've told you the story. I really felt like I was a second thought. I told you that my brother passed away, Billy, when he was 4 years old, and then I came out of the blue when my mom was much older. And I remember as a kid laying in bed wondering, why, God, did you bring me here? If you ever struggle to understand why you're here, the only person that can truly answer that question is God. But there's more. That ignorance is caused by something, is it not? And what is that? Again, back to verse 18. They're alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Ronnie, what did you say? It's due to their what?
The hardness of their heart.
The hardness of their heart. It's not God. It's not that God isn't there. It's their hearts are too hard to even see Him.
When I listen to the news, which I try not to listen to the news because it's all bad news, I hear about the things that happened like on Saturday night. There was a party, somebody got killed, and I think instead, if we had been preparing for today, which is the Lord's Day, to come and worship Him. When growing up, driving to church, you would see children playing outside, and even now, I said, as parents, the responsibility that we have to bring our children to church to help them, guide them, so that they can learn also from God, and what is important. And you see, it is sad, because we're not instilling that interest of the Lord.
We're not giving that to our children as a heritage. For many of us, even though His glory is all around us, for many people, they don't sense it, they don't feel it, and the only reason the Scripture can tell us that's going on is because their hearts have become spiritually hardened. Their eyes spiritually blind, right? What did Jesus say? Eyes that what? And ears that hear. By the way, and I think about college students. My daughter went back to college this morning. Two smart people look at the same set of evidence for whether or not there's a God and come up with two different conclusions. Think about that. When I look outside and I see the beauty of the creation, it testifies He's here. Another person looks at that same creation and says what?
It just happened.
Just happened.
Don't we see what we want to see?
That may be true. When a professor in college that you think is smart looks at you and says, the evidence points to there being no God, but other people look at that same evidence and see God in it, a lot of times our kids will think, which one is smarter? But it's not about smarts. Is it? No. Whether or not we see God has nothing to do with the quality of the evidence. It's the state of our what? Of our heart. There's no saying that says, the same sun that hardens the clay softens the wax. The difference is not in the sun that shines on the material, but the material itself, right? Does anybody in this room know who Friedrich Nietzsche is? Friedrich Nietzsche. Or Nietzsche, I can't remember how you pronounce the last name. He's a very well-known atheist. In the writing Beyond Good and Evil, he says, the idea of objective human beings who are just disinterested seekers in truth is crazy. The human heart is too insecure to ever be able to handle the truth. Which reminds me of the scene, Jack Nicholson. What does he say? You can't handle the truth, right? He goes on to say there's a natural hatred and fear of the truth. We revise our memories to fit the story of ourselves that we want to believe. Boy, that's true. I'll agree with him on that. There's no way I could have ever done that, says our pride. And it's not long before the past we remember is the past that we want to be true. Everybody in all different cultures does that. We mold the truth to fit what?
What we want to hear.
Our preferences. And people do it with the truth about God. Is science directly opposed to God? No. But I can promise you this. If the heart of a scientist is directed towards spurning God, he's going to look at the evidence and say it spurns against God. So there we are. Paul's described the problem. And the problem is the what? The human heart. By the way, were Gentiles, all Gentiles, just not religious people? No. Mankind has always been very religious. But our tendencies of our religious hearts are not always born out of direct love for God. Look at verse 24. See, the way a lot of religion is done entirely for one person. And that is the self-interest. You give to God because God's going to do what? If you give to God, God's going to do what, church?
Back to you.
Give back to you. That's about self-interest. He's going to bless your life. If that's our approach, might reconsider. Look at what verse 24 says. Somebody read that for us, please.
To put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness.
Created after the likeness of God in what? True righteousness and holiness. So what is God after in us? He's after two things. He just said them in that verse. What are they? Righteousness and holiness. People who do righteous for the reasons God does, again, created after whose likeness? God's. God does righteous not because, well, nobody can make God do anything. So God's not doing righteous because somebody made him do it, right? That's who he is. It's not a means to an end, but because it's his very nature, because he loves it. Therefore, well, our problem, some of us, especially the Pharisees, did it for theater reasons. What are those reasons? Why did they do righteous things?
Look at me.
Yeah.
To be seen by others, right? What is the solution? Look at verse 21. It says, assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. In other words, if you want to know the very nature of God, if you want to have knowledge of God, where do you find that knowledge and nature? Through Jesus. So we're not ignorant of him anymore. And then verse 23, what does it say? And to be renewed and the spirit of your minds. In other words, you have a heart change. A renewed heart that delights in the knowledge of Jesus Christ and the knowledge of His truth and righteousness. So if you have, like I do, I guess I'm what's called nearsighted. I can't see far away, right? How many of you are nearsighted? How many of you are farsighted? Did you know that my mom, she was, she was nearsighted, and she had open heart surgery and had a heart valve put in 1983. When she came out of the surgery, I kid you not, she was no longer nearsighted, she was farsighted. I don't know how that happened. Promise you the truth. Not making that up.
It didn't happen to me.
But we've got to have a new vision. And that vision can only come through knowledge of God through Jesus Christ, His Son. That's the only thing that can change our heart. So, in other words, all these behaviors that are listed, could you come up with some of those on your own? Could you do some of those things on your own? Tell the truth? Not steal? Get it? Could you do some of those without Jesus Christ? Yes or no? Yes. But the difference is, it's not about making you a good person. This is not just about making you a good person. It's about making you more and more into the likeness and image of God's Son. That's what it's really all about. So how do we overcome our ignorance? How do we overcome our hard-heartedness? Let's do this real quick before we go. Let's say we walk outside this morning and there's a rainbow. I like a rainbow. But if you walked outside this morning and you were blind, could you see the beauty of that rainbow? Now, I could explain to somebody how beautiful that rainbow is, couldn't I? But there's nothing like experiencing it yourself. Someone can share with you the beauty of God. Someone can share with you the marvelous loving kindness of His very nature, His holiness and His purity and His righteousness. Somebody can tell you about it, but you'll never truly have the vision until you experience it yourself. You'll never truly change until you experience that presence in your life. So all these things that we read here, go back real quick and look at them. From verse 17 all the way through verse 32. All those good things, all those negative things that you want to get rid of. All those things are great. But ultimately, it's not about just being a good person. It's about being like Jesus, God's own Son. Thank you all for spending your time with us this morning. We're going to go ahead and dismiss at this time.